Are we ready to go? Okay, welcome. We're going to talk in this hour about specifically, can the United States work with Iran, looking at the domestic political situations in both Iran and the United States, and how this current environment in both countries could affect the question of whether we can or cannot work with Iran on issues other than the nuclear question. And you all have the bios of the three panelists who each have a particular perspective and special knowledge, unique knowledge about the issues we're going to talk about. To begin with, we have to think about what's going on in Iran and how, I guess, you think about the fact that Iran, in making this decision, has made a fundamental decision about the revolution. This decision for us was a foreign policy and political problem, but not fundamental to who we are. The decision of the Supreme Leader to authorize this agreement goes to the core of what the revolution was all about and how Iran will develop in the future. Will it begin to be integrated as Iran and become less of the Islamic revolution in the way it deals with its neighbors and with the world? And so what Iran is going through in its own political environment is trying to adjust to this new reality that they're facing, and trying to think of how they begin to integrate themselves into the political environment and to the world environment, which they apparently want to be a part. At the same time, hold on to the core values of the political power that was established by the Ayatollah Khomeini. So I guess, Negar, you know so much about these things. Tell us a bit about how you think the Iranian political system is managing the big issue they're facing right now.
Sure, thanks for having me, and thanks to Barbara and everybody who came today. I want to start from the top and the most recent event, which is the last speech of the leader of Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei. One of his harshest speeches, I would say, against the nuclear deal. But I think the devil is in the details. So he actually, for the first time, comes out very strong against US presidential candidates. And he said that they keep speaking of tearing up the nuclear deal. And if they do tear up the nuclear deal, we will set fire to it, which is a pretty strong language. But I think what was more important is the comment he made before this sentence, which was, we assure everyone that we are not going to violate the nuclear deal, or the JCPOA, as they call it in Iran, barjam. This has been something that he's been consistent, I would say, about in his speeches, as much as anti-negotiation or anti-American or anti-Western that his speeches come out. As the top hardliner in Iran, I think he's been pretty consistent in supporting the nuclear deal, or at least the way I distinguish it is supporting the Iranian side of the negotiation. He always praises the negotiation team, the diplomatic crew headed by Javad Zarif, which is, I think, a main distinguishing factor with top Republicans here in the US. And he directs his criticism at the other side, mainly the US, for not holding up their side of the deal. Some of the details of the sanctions were discussed here before, and it's something that the Iranians, I would say hardliners, and to some extent moderates, agree that the soul of the deal, or the US's end of the deal, which was lifting of the sanctions and Iran benefiting after this lifting is not being met, and the Iranians at least are not satisfied, specifically the hardliners, and they're using that very much against the moderates in Iran, the team of President Rouhani and Foreign Minister Zarif. I want to go back to the 2013 election also, the presidential election where President Rouhani won. I always call that a referendum, or as close as you can, it's okay, as close as it could get to a public referendum in Iran, to the nuclear policy, to the future of Iran's nuclear program and its foreign policy, how Iran deals with the world, how to the extent that the administration has power, they're going to act and be an actor in the region and in the world. The voters, the electorate, came out strongly in support of President Rouhani, which was running on a platform of moderation and prudence. And I think he's been fairly successful in shifting the path of the previous administration, which was adventurous and a lot of tension in their foreign policy and also the nuclear deal. An important change was that the nuclear file was immediately transferred to the Foreign Ministry of Iran, which is under the administration. Before that, it wasn't. And the foreign minister took over, and he's been successful. Now, going back to the next election, which was just a few months ago, the new parliament of Iran was just elected. They just started. I would call that, again, another referendum on the achievement of the administration and how they were able to follow up with the negotiations on this new path and cut the deal, basically, with the US. I think the moderates or the administration came out strong. The candidates who were mainly referred to as supporters of the government got strong votes by the people to the extent that they were allowed to run. And radical hardliners, the major players in the parliament who were against the deal, against the negotiations, and who were causing all kinds of hiccups, were voted out by the populace. So going forward from here to the next major event in Iran, which will be the next presidential election in 2017, I think would be the next step would be if the moderates are going to deliver the post-deal era, basically showing the benefits of the deal, and if the populace is going to see the economic benefits of the deal in their everyday life. It hasn't really been that significant yet, and I think that's the challenge that President Rouhani and the moderates are facing. And I think they're in a very strong position now, but it's a very delicate position, and it can change at any minute. And that's something that the hardliners are working really hard at, to trying to prove that the other side was not to be trusted. Iran cannot trust the US as a continuation of the policy of the revolution, and the moderates were wrong in extending a hand to the other side and breaking this deal and holding their side of the deal.
Do you agree that this decision for Iran is quite fundamental to their whole worldview and their political system?
Of course.
Yeah.
I would say the change within the political structure of Iran didn't come at the election of President Rouhani. It started with the reform era and President Khatami a while back. But this was a very fundamental turning point because for the first time, people had a chance to indirectly voice their opinion about the nuclear program, which is a very delicate thing. The populace was never asked about it. It was a secret program for a very long time. It wasn't something the Iranians could get a vote on. But in the 2013 election, the top negotiator of the past decade, Saeed Jalili, was a candidate. He suffered a major loss. He didn't get enough votes. And he was perceived to be the candidate, he was perceived to be the candidate, the preferred candidate of the hardliners, or mainly the supreme leader. President Rouhani was within the realm of the elections in Iran. President Rouhani was considered the other side, the exact opposite side, and he got very strong votes. So that was the first time, and the populace, basically the moderates, the reformists, and the young population was standing against the hardliners and the story of the past.
I just want to welcome Iris, another one of the stars we have here today with child. So thank you for coming. Let me move on to the other side of this. Suzanne, you've been following this for a long time, one of the great experts at Brookings and in the State Department, on watching the U.S. manage itself and this Iran coming together for nuclear. Tell how you think the United States is reacting and will react to the developments that Negar has been talking about internally.
Thank you, and thanks so much for having me here. Thanks to you and to Barbara. I would probably take a step back and say that I think from my perspective, the idea that the deal itself is a wholesale transformation of the Islamic Republic or the core values of the revolution, I think is very much contestable. I see the deal as a transactional diplomatic overture rather than a transformational one. I think it's in fact analogous to other important transactional moments in Iranian foreign policy, including the end of the war with Iraq. But in and of itself, it does not, I think, and I think the political establishment in Iran is determined to ensure that it does not in any way shake the fundamental core of the revolution or the system. And in fact, what we're seeing since the diplomacy of the deal throughout the negotiations themselves is an effort to reinforce the system. I would say, if anything, the Islamic Republic is more secure, more consolidated today than it's been at any time since the revolution. And I think that that fundamentally is an appreciation that the administration recognizes and incorporated in the way that the Obama administration incorporated in its outreach to Iran. If you think back to President Obama's position on Iran and the way that he's pursued this issue, it began, of course, with his primary campaign in which he articulated in an almost unprecedented fashion a willingness to reach out, not just to then President Ahmadinejad, but U.S. adversaries around the world. This is a core part of his vision for American diplomacy and for his own administration. And he pursued that throughout his 8 years, 7.5 so far in office. I think it was clear that for him, it wasn't about the character of the Islamic Republic or the nature of the system in Iran. That very much informed the threat that the nuclear issue posed, but his diplomacy was not sort of about reaching out to good guys versus bad guys, strengthening moderates versus hardliners. It was very much about trying to create an opportunity, a pathway for a diplomatic dialogue with an adversarial state, a state that he presumed would remain adversarial in the aftermath of the deal. And he pursued it with Ahmadinejad in 2009 through his sort of public diplomacy, but also through the private diplomatic overtures to the Supreme Leader, letters that we know of, as well as the formal efforts of the P5+1 then to negotiate a confidence-building mechanism with Iran that briefly appeared to be viable. He continued to pursue it even as Iran's political environment didn't seem terribly hospitable to or receptive to any overtures from the United States. Throughout the post-2009, post-democratic uprising in Iran, he continued to kind of cast these overtures, both publicly as well as obviously we now know privately through the back-channel diplomacy that began in Oman. And so I think in a way, the fact that he was able to the Obama administration was able to bring the deal to fruition is a testament to this willingness to continue to persevere even when the odds seemed relatively low. But I think it also is a recognition that ultimately this is, as the president has said, a limited bargain, a bargain on a specific issue that solves one specific issue. and that does not necessarily lead to progress in other issues. I think it's quite clear that the president used the possibility, and the administration used the possibility of broader cooperation, broader opportunities as a way to try to pitch the deal to those who were receptive to that concept. And I think he's obviously would remain open to that, and the administration remains open to those kinds of possibilities. But I don't get the sense that there is the same investment in problem solving with Iran outside of the nuclear deal, because the nuclear deal was in many ways reflective of the broader non-proliferation agenda of the Obama administration. And the formula was always relatively transparent, that there was a deal to be done that enabled Iran to keep some residual elements of its nuclear infrastructure in exchange for sanctions relief. And that kind of components of a deal was clear within the Bush administration, and it was clear to the Obama administration. There aren't the same clear parameters for a deal on many of the other differences that we face with Iran. I think the environment that we're in today is one in which the president has a fairly short time frame for any action, any sort of new opportunities with Iran, and in which the next administration is certain to be less hospitable to Iran than this administration. So I think it's an interesting moment, because clearly the Iranians are trying to test what might be possible, both in terms of the interpretation of the deal with respect to the sanctions that were discussed in the previous panel, but I think also in other avenues as well. That doesn't, I think, necessarily lead to a clear pathway to any additional progress. And I think that the sort of specter of a much more contentious administration, whether it's a Clinton administration or whether it's a Trump administration, is one that is quite interesting and ultimately overhangs the current moment.
Well, thank you for posing that. I mean, you've set up a good discussion for all of us. I guess I have 2 points on your question, on your doubting that this is a fundamental shift. One is that, as we know, Salehi in 2012, while Ahmadinejad was still in, was authorized to begin these negotiations with the U.S. And what we also know, Salehi said this, that he did it with the direct approval of the supreme leader without Ahmadinejad being told. So it appears that at least and Salehi has written about this, it appears that already in 2012, the supreme leader, for whatever reason, had decided this had to be done. Rouhani, and this wasn't dealing with the liberals, this was dealing with the man who's been hostile to the United States for years. So I guess I tend to believe that because of that, you can see that he himself realized this was in their interest from an economic and international point of view. Now, I think you're absolutely right that they will probably do what they can domestically to empower the authorities to keep political resistance down. That this doesn't mean that the political system is going to be liberalized. But again, I go back to China and other cases where political systems have sought to open up their economy broadly and still try to hold on politically. And I think that's going to be sort of a struggle that Cuba's having, that Vietnam had, and in a funny way, this relates to the Iran experience.
I'd just jump in on 2 points. I actually think that there is real consensus within Iran in favor of the deal. That there has always been real consensus within Iran in favor of the deal.
Except
the deal
not
was
in the head of
never,
the supreme leader. Yeah.
there was never the same degree of political battle as we saw in the sort of swift implementation of the deal, the swift implementation of other issues related to the deal. I think, the domestic environments in that respect were very different, and there was a bit of a false equivalence often depicted between them. So I do think that the deal had the Supreme Leader's blessing. I would assume it continues to have his blessing, but I do think that, as Nagar said, his speeches are a little bit of a leading indicator of potential trouble that we should not miss. In terms of the prospects for economic opening to alter the political system within Iran, I would be far more skeptical, and it's based on my own work in my recent book on the Iranian political economy. In fact, what, not
mean,
just the
whether
history
this can't happen at all.
What we've seen because of the nature of the Iranian economy, in part because of the centrality of the oil sector, the role of the state in the economy, there isn't the same sort of a fallout effect as there has been. We've seen prior experiences with economic liberalization, economic opening under both President Rafsanjani, President Qasemi, and in neither case did it actually empower any kind of political liberalization.
Good, great, thank you. Suzanne has been a partner of Stephen's and mine for 15 years on these issues and has now been probably as close to anybody in this country to what's going on inside Iran and what's going on inside Iran from the standpoint of U.S. interests. She just came back from Oslo with Stephen, where she met with Javad Zarif for some time and probably has some fresh thinking about these issues. But please comment on how you think, can we work with Iran? And maybe what you think of what your two colleagues said about how.
Well, first let me thank you, Bill, and Barbara, and Iris, the Iran Project, and Atlantic Council for organizing this meeting. And let me go a step further and thank you for achieving what I call optimal gender balance on this panel. I really hope you've
gender or ideology?
No, gender. And I really hope you're setting a new standard that all think tanks in this city will take note of. Now that I got that out of the way. I was recently meeting with an Iranian who lives in Tehran, and we were talking about how far the U.S. and Iran relationship has come over these past few years. But at the same time, we were commiserating, nearly in tears, I would say, how we, both as proponents of this deal, he in his country, me in my country, always feel compelled when we're talking to groups like this to hedge. We always have to start out by acknowledging that this was a deal focused on a single issue. It wasn't about transforming this or that. And I guess I'm here today to say I'm not going to do that, even though it's true. But I think now we have a full year of Iranian compliance on the JCPOA, coupled with another additional 2 years of full compliance on the JPOA, which was the interim agreement, and also compliance on the other side. That's a pretty solid track record, especially in the context of this very troubled relationship. So what I would like to say is maybe the time now has come when we ask the question, can the U.S. work with Iran? Well, the fact is we are working with Iran. The implementation team headed by Ambassador Stephen Mull, the U.S. implementation team, met with the Iranian implementation team headed by Dr. Aragchi in Oslo just the last couple of days. And they're working on this. There are other areas where the U.S. is working with Iran more quietly, not necessarily negotiating, but discussing, and we can talk about those. But I think now maybe we should broaden our imagination and have the vision to be able to say, is it now time to think about this transactional deal as a potentially transformative moment in the U.S.-Iran relationship? Can we think about the possibility of turning into something more enduring? And that can go all different ways. I want to commend George Perkovich's recent article, how he said building on the JCPOA to strengthen the global nonproliferation regime is one way to do it. And he had some very good ideas in there. But I would even say I would love to see the candidates talk about this in a different way. It's probably not going to happen. We know how campaigns go and elections go in this country. But I do think the next president, whoever she may be, should at least be thinking with her team how to make one of the great priorities of American statecraft in the next few years, focus it on how to just make this a less contentious relationship. I'm not talking about full restoration of diplomatic relations, but how to take the air out of some of the more contentious points that we have with each other. Now, I know I don't mean to sound idealist because that's not who I am, but there are profound problems between our countries and I should say our governments that are not going to go away anytime soon. We see that in Syria. We see it in other parts of the region, which is on fire. One thing that doesn't make sense to me is how this Iranian government is treating its diaspora, the very people that the country needs at this moment. Iranian Americans in particular living abroad who could come home now and help the country at this moment. They have resources, they have skills, and even beyond that, just for humanitarian purposes, helping to rebuild those bridges now that have been severed for decades between families and friends. So make no bones about it. I know this isn't going to be easy. I would characterize it right now, we're in a phase of one step forward, two steps back. Can we get to a phase where we're one step forward, one step back? I would really welcome that. And just to close this, and there are other, maybe we'll address it later in the panel, specific ways we can work with Iran that first and foremost advance U.S. interest. Just go along on those bases. I could think of probably 4 or 5 off the top of my head right now.
Thank you, Suzanne. That's great. Do you think this is a transformational period within Iran and in U.S.-Iranian relations, or a little bit more of the same?
I think it is, and I have to say I agree with both Suzanne, so it's very complicated. It's not a transformational period for Iranian hardliners. Make no mistake, they don't want any kind of engagement or re-engagement or overture, specifically with the U.S. That's why the same rhetoric has stayed with the hardliners, Supreme Leader, and other top hardliners. But are they supportive of the deal? Yes. And has this been a new era in how Iran has been dealing with the West, specifically with the U.S.? I think yes, it is. It was unimaginable to any Iranian hardliners and moderates in 2013 even that the Iranian foreign minister would meet with the U.S. Secretary of State in public, on the record, taking pictures every month, going into bilateral meetings, and actually making progress. This is not something that's happened anytime before, and that's a breakthrough, at least for the Iranians. Image matters, rhetoric matters, and I want to go back to Suzanne's point about whoever...
Which Suzanne?
The Suzanne who
DiMaggio.
thinks the next president is a she. That it will be difficult. It's actually one of the main concerns of Iranian moderates and reformists, that what will happen after President Obama, whoever she may be. It's a different rhetoric. It's much tougher on Iran. It's been very tough in the 2008 campaign. I'm confident that the path, the nuclear deal will continue, but like I said, I think it's a very delicate position that the Iranian moderates are in, and this has worked because both sides, both administrations were controlled by moderates. It didn't work when President Khatami was facing President Bush. It didn't work when President Obama was facing President Ahmadinejad. And I feel like this was a perfect balance when President Rouhani came in and President Obama was committed. Both were committed, and the two moderates, if any, on the both sides can cut the deal. And I don't think the hardliners will be able to continue that on both sides.
Suzanne, thank you for coming, because you do bring a different perspective, which is precisely why I want you to repeat it. Tell how you react to it. Nagar said.
Well, I mean, I think it is quite important and absolutely true that this was a breakthrough moment in terms of the long and very frustrating efforts to generate some diplomatic traction between the two countries. Every U.S. administration, both Republican and Democratic, has sought to engage Iran in a sustained process of negotiations. The only one that actually succeeded before the Obama administration, briefly, and in a limited area, was actually the Bush administration in the aftermath of 9/11. So it's not wholly unprecedented, but at this level, at the foreign ministerial level, at the sort of routinization of diplomatic contacts, nothing like this has ever taken place, and that is important. And I think that in many respects will sustain itself almost irrespective of who sits in the Oval Office, because it has been normalized on the Iranian side, and that was the breakthrough. If you think back, we have had times where there are moderates. I hate to use the equivalence. I hate to use the phrase moderate, period, because I think it's problematic, but I think that we can't kind of create an equivalence between an Obama administration and President Rouhani, but we have had moments, particularly during the Clinton administration, where there was an American president really seeking to reach out at a time where there was a more reform-oriented Iranian executive branch, and it didn't come to fruition, despite the fact that, as Bruce Riedel, who's sitting on the next panel, can document, there was a considerable effort made to sort of create and reassure the Iranians privately as well as publicly, just as during the Obama administration.
It's interesting on the moderate issue. A person we know quite well who is a sociologist followed the elections, the recent Majlis elections, and his argument was that we're no longer talking about reformists and conservatives, we're talking about moderates. And in fact, when they describe the Majlis, they themselves use the term the moderates, and the extremes of the reformist side and the conservative side have departed. So they describe themselves as much more moderate than we would describe ourselves, to say the least. Suzanne, what would one thing you'd like to see happen in the before the new administration comes in?
There's so many things. I'll be quick. Let me just run through a few. One would be, of course, given the excellent first panel, we really need
As opposed to this one?
Well, the jury's still out. We really need, and I mean the U.S. really needs to ensure that the handoff of the status of this deal to the next administration is in really good shape. And I think the views expressed in the first panel, it's clear to me that there are issues on both sides that need to be addressed, and that would be very important, that this administration fully pursue every avenue to make sure we're living up to our side of the deal, because the Iranians certainly are, as the IAEA continues to tell us. The second area, of course, has to be Syria. And here, I was just in Oslo, and apparently Foreign Minister Zarif and Secretary Kerry did talk about Syria in their private discussions. Kerry then talked to the press and said that there were some specific items that Foreign Minister Zarif put forward, particularly on how to kickstart this process and a political agreement in particular, and how to think of Assad. So this is an example of how we can build on the deal, use these interactions to talk about issues where we both have pressing national interests. The other, I have to say, I mean, if we take a tour of the whole region, we can go by each country.
We haven't got time for that.
But one of the things that really interests me is for the next administration to continue what President Obama has done in a sense of attempting to rebalance the region by engaging Iran, by being a bit tough on our Saudi friends and other GCC allies, by saying, he literally said, you need to share the neighborhood, you need to share the region. You know, that's pretty monumental. for an American president to go that far. And I would say that if the Iranians were not complying with this agreement, he could never say that. So now this administration, with the few months that are left, and the next administration, in my view, should carry on that way of thinking, pursue a rebalance in the region where we are reassuring Saudi Arabia and our GCC friends that we are there. We note their high concerns to Iran's behavior in the region, but at the same time, we have the tough talk and say to them that things are not going to go back to the way they are. Our relationship with Iran
we're
is
creeping
changing.
with this into Barbara's panel, so,
Yes,
so we've crept.
I just want to give a, you know, an idea of the things we can talk about. Certainly Afghanistan is another one where there are compelling interests. And then finally, the most compelling common interest to me is pretty self-evident, and that is how both governments and countries see Daesh as a threat.
Good. Okay, great. Thank you all. Now, we'll go to the audience, and yes, you, in the white coat.
Thank you very much, Atlantic Council. I'm Faye Mockler. I'm an Atlantic Council
Could you
member.
stand
Barbara,
up?
thank you very much for
Why
putting
don't you
this
stand
program
up? Could you stand up?
together. Thank you. I have a question for Mrs. DiMaggio. As you mentioned, you don't want to go into details, that the Iranian government is hoping that this deal would lead into cooperations in other areas, including the crisis in Syria and the crisis in Iraq. And we have a very strong lobby firm on the Capitol Hill that it's prohibiting this cooperation in this area. Iranians have openly fought in Iraq, and they have even paid casualties for that. General Soleimani is the man who's doing that. And the Saudis,
you get to your question?
Saudis are pushing
Yeah.
on the other side. Do you see a future for United States to get Iranian and the Saudis together to resolve their differences?
Yeah, I must say that it's not entirely clear to me that the leadership of the Iranian government is fully on board with pursuing talks on other areas. In fact, the Supreme Leader himself has said no. Until the deal is implemented on this side in the fullest way, they will not. But as we've seen with so many of the Supreme Leader statements, there's always a little wiggle room there. And just 2 days ago, I guess, in Oslo, both Foreign Minister Zarif, as I said, and Secretary Kerry discussed Syria. So the talks are happening, they're not negotiating. Now in Saudi Arabia, I think the United States can play a role. I don't think we want to position ourselves as a balancer. That has a lot of baggage and implications. But there's no question that we should be encouraging both sides to come together. I think it's notable that the Iranian government, the foreign ministry in particular, has extended numerous messages of outreach to the Saudi government that they are interested in beginning dialogue. And that has been fairly consistent since September 2013. And it seems to me maybe Tehran is already at that point where they want to have those talks, and it's the Saudis that are not yet ready. And we should be talking to them quietly and firmly to offer assurances and encourage them to move in that direction. Because after all, if you look at every conflict in the region, the solution or part of the solution runs through both Riyadh and Tehran.
Okay. Well, the trouble is we're occupying the panels. I hope you'll ask about bilateral issues. Barbara, okay, so you're going to be talking later. I should probably get other people involved.
Actually, I have
okay,
a bilateral question, if I may,
right.
very quickly, and that's for Negar. If this Boeing deal goes through, what will be the psychological impact on Iranians of being able to have Boeing planes to travel around the country? And also, I'd be interested in your speculation on who the hardliners will put up for president next year against Rouhani. Thank you.
I think any sort of airplane deal would be a great achievement to the administration. It doesn't seem as big from a U.S. perspective, but it's actually a very big deal for the Iranian populace. Airplanes are something that are not just an issue of the poor or the middle class or the upper class. It's not hardline or moderate. If you get on that plane and if it crashes, you're going to die. So it's been something that's been an issue to the Iranian people, and that's why the administration has been pursuing it very strongly. I don't think there would be much of a difference to the Iranian passenger of getting on an Airbus or a Boeing. But if it's an American plane, of course, again, like I said, image matters, rhetoric matters. It would be an indication that this economic re-engagement is starting with the U.S., and that's definitely something that I think the new generation of Iranians would actually be happy about.
Let me say that I've heard from very senior Iranian officials and from some Boeing salespeople that they've been told that the sale of American aircraft to Iran would be extremely positive to the Iranian people, not just because they fly better than Airbus, but because they do demonstrate that this agreement is bringing about change. And this is a very strong message that I've received. Maybe it's just.
No, I completely agree. It's an economic issue, but it has a political message attached to it. So okay. I think it would be great.
Yes. Okay.
Oh, the hardliners, I'm actually not sure, but I hate to predict, but I would say the person will lose. So Rouhani will, whoever that person
whoever that woman is,
he's bound to lose, that woman.
Yes.
Yeah, I have a question for Susan Maloney. Jim Slattery, I'm just curious, can you shed any light on how Western business can really engage in Iran without bumping into the Revolutionary Guard? And I know you've written extensively about the political economy in Iran. I'm just curious what light you might shed on that question.
I think the answer to that lies in a $1,000 an hour lawyer suite on K Street. Unfortunately, I think, as I said early on, the deal is a boon for compliance lawyers. It will remain that way. It is an incredibly complicated terrain, and the difficulty that we have is in ensuring that businesses are, in fact, respecting the existing sanctions regime without feeling constrained by the concern that sanctions that are no longer on the books are going to come back to bite them. So it is, I think, an environment in which many companies are looking quite eagerly because it is an emerging market of some size and potential. But it is one in which there are clear risks, both from the perspective of U.S. law, but also from the perspective of what's happening within Iran. And that gets to the corruption issues that have been quite prominent in the Iranian media in the past month or so, other ongoing issues with the structure of the banking system, but also the ambiguity about the investment terms that Iran has on offer that has been an ongoing issue for the oil sector, where this kind of new contract model remains not quite yet finalized from the Iranian side after several years of promises. I just want to get back quickly to the Saudi issue, and I just want to make the point that Bruce will probably make more effectively for me. So consider this an advertisement to stay in your seats for the next panel, which is that I doubt that this administration, or frankly anyone in Washington, is going to have the political capital to persuade the Saudis to do something in the region with Iran that they don't want to do, or to persuade the Iranians to do something with the Saudis that they don't want to do. So I'm not sure we're best positioned as a bridge, but I will defer to Bruce, who will have much more to say on that.
Good. Yes, let me take 3 questions. One here.
Yeah, this is Mohammed Al-Sulami.
Would you stand up, please?
Yeah, I'm Mohammed Al-Sulami. I'm from Saudi Arabia. Just I want to comment a bit on what Susan and President Xi said. Actually, she mentioned that Iran wants to have a dialogue or conversation with Saudi Arabia, but Saudi is not ready. I think it's maybe not this case. Saudi is ready for talking with Iran from the first day of Hassan Rouhani came as a president, and before that as well. The problem is that Iran says something, but it does something else in the region. So when Saudi Arabia, Iran interfere in the interior affairs of Arab countries like Yemen, Bahrain, Kuwait, eastern part of Saudi Arabia, and then at the same time, Iran says we want to dialogue. I think if Iran go one step further to Saudi, Saudi will go 2 steps to Iran if it change its behavior in the region. This is the main issue for Saudi Arabia in terms of Iran. That is
so this is a statement. You don't have a question, right?
No, I said I want to comment. That's what I said.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, yes, the lady, yes, black.
Hi, Roxana from NIAC. This may be too speculative of a question. We've talked about changing of administrations. I wondered if anyone on the panel wanted to comment on a potential change in the supreme leader and how that would affect the deal or moving forward in U.S.-Iran relations.
Okay. Who else? I had you. Okay.
Yes, thank you. Jean-François Wattin with TSG. Based on my limited French experience, there were many companies that were eager to go into Iran. They won't go because banks are not going to finance them, period. So is there a chance, and companies are going to put the blame squarely on the U.S. Treasury and on the U.S. more generally for not going into the country. Is there a chance that that could kind of complicate the relationship a little bit more? Because people will complain that the spirit of the agreement is not respected. The letter, yes, John Smith was very clear about that. OFAC is all over Europe. Everybody understands what they mean, but nobody's going to go.
Okay. Okay, let's answer the question about your question.
The change in the top leadership is
Supreme
that's
leader.
definitely a matter of nature. If life comes to an end, that might happen. But what's interesting is that with the recent parliamentary elections in Iran in last February, there was another important election, which was the Assembly of Experts, who is the body that's responsible for overseeing and possibly reappointing the next leader, whoever he or she may be. This assembly is going to be in power for the next 8 years. So that might very well be in the prospect. And in that election also, within the confinements of the Assembly of Experts, elections in the Islamic Republic, I think the moderates were able to achieve big, or at least eliminate some of the more radical portions of the hardliners. The head of the assembly is still one of the big allies of the supreme leader, but I think President Rafsanjani on the moderate side and some of his allies have a stronger hand in this assembly compared to the last one. So there might be some prospect for hope in that area, but
Anybody want to answer the question?
way in the future.
Susan?
I'll give it a shot. I mean, I've talked to at least one big French company that is going in. And I think we can all imagine a couple of them that have been active in Iran before that are clearly going to be returning. So I don't think it's accurate to say that no companies are going to go in. I think there's going to be a sort of an appropriate hesitancy given Iran's history, given the history of some of these companies in trying to deal with Iran and the question of their terms. But I think the broader question is the deal cannot be held hostage to the mood swings of the supreme leader. And the sense that the Iranians feel cheated is one that actually is not in any way, I think, validated by a close examination of the deal. The difficulty is that the Iranian, both president, foreign minister, and hardliners sold this deal in a way that I think was somewhat inflated as meeting the Supreme Leader's red lines that no sanctions could remain. There was a kind of false perception created that, you know, business was going to boom in the direct aftermath of the deal. And this isn't consistent with any of Iran's prior experiences with trying to open up its economy. After the war, during the Khatami period when there was a renewed effort to recruit foreign investment, the simple reality is that money is slow. And capital is a coward. And fundamentally, there are issues and risks within Iran. I think the administration is already bending over backwards to try to clarify the sanctions picture, to try to reassure where that is legally possible. But ultimately, no company can be promised that it will never be subject to US sanctions enforcement, because fundamentally that depends on specific investigations. So, you know, I think that the reality is that the Iranian political elite owes the country a clearer understanding of how long this sort of rebuilding period was going to last. Rafsanjani was always very careful when he was president. He didn't promise a rose garden the next day, and he still found a political price to pay when it didn't come as quickly as people would have liked. And I think Rouhani and those around him have got to be clear about what the expectations are. That's simply not something that can come from Washington, not effectively or credibly.
Thank you, Suzanne. Let me conclude with one comment. My sense is that the administration, the Obama administration, has set in place a desire to establish enough linkages between the US government and the Iranian government so that these channels will be in place when the new administration comes in. And even if she doesn't decide to pursue these more aggressive policy, the fact that there will be in place a functioning relationship, as there are with Mull, and I think that there are regular contacts now between Treasury and the central bank, and presumably there will be other options available to establish bilateral contacts, if certainly not relationships, which are a long way. I mean, any formal relationship is a long way off. But unless after Kerry leaves office, if there isn't a way to work the relationship, even only on implementation, if there isn't sort of a place, a team that can work it out with the type of, I hate to use the word trust, but there is trust that is developed between Zarif and Kerry, which is somewhat unprecedented, it seems to me, in the history of US-Iranian relations since the Shah. And how do you replace that is going to be a big task. And I think that the Obama administration understands that, and they're working on ways to put that in place. So we will be able to work, we will have to work on implementation. We will be able to work on other issues if we can put in place a structure which will move beyond the Kerry period as Secretary of State. But I want to thank all of you for coming, and as you say, the gender balance is about right now. And
there's one more male.
I know one more. Is it male? She won't tell me what hers is. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Let's thank you. I do want to recognize Joe Cirincione, who's here, who's been our great pal and supporter. Joe, thank you for coming. It's a pleasure.